Good evening, weary travelers of the modern world. Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we drift through the quiet corridors of the past together. Tonight, we're wandering through a world that rarely made it into the grand chronicles, the humble, necessary world of medieval privies, guard robes, and moonlit midden heaps. We'll explore how our ancestors managed life's most basic needs, from peasant cottages to royal castles. Before we begin, a gentle note. While our journey tonight is historically accurate, we'll keep things family-friendly. There may be mild mentions of medieval odors ahead, but nothing that should disturb your peaceful drift toward sleep. The medieval chroniclers wrote of battles and kings, of harvests and holy days, but 90% of daily life remained unrecorded, the quiet routines that filled ordinary hours. And so sanitation becomes detective work for us, piecing together fragments from archaeological digs, manor rolls, and the occasional complaint in town records. Think of waste management as a lens through which we can glimpse social class, gender roles, and the ingenious ways medieval people organized their communities. Where you relieved yourself and how revealed everything about your place in the world. The materials you used, the privacy you enjoyed, the methods of disposal available to you, all of these spoke volumes about your station in life. Tonight, we'll visit 3 distinct environments, each with its own rhythms and customs. First, the rural cottages where most people lived, simple timber frames surrounded by gardens and common lands. Then, the bustling walled towns with their narrow streets and community solutions. Finally, the great stone castles, where privacy was a privilege and architecture served even the most humble human needs. Medieval society was intensely hierarchical, and this hierarchy extended even to the most private moments of daily life. Yet, within each social stratum, people developed remarkably practical and often ingenious solutions to universal human needs. They understood concepts we're only rediscovering today, the importance of composting, the value of human waste as fertilizer, and the delicate balance between public health and individual privacy. Picture a typical peasant dwelling nestled in the English countryside around the year 1300. The structure is a timber frame hut with walls of woven branches and clay daub, the technique known as wattle and daub. Smoke drifts lazily from a central fire pit, and herbs hang dry-in from the rafters, not just for cooking, but for their medicinal properties and pleasant aromas that help mask less pleasant odors. In the corner of this single-room dwelling, often behind a simple cloth screen or woven partition, sits the chamber pot or piss pot. These weren't shameful objects, but practical necessities, crafted by local potters with the same care given to cooking vessels. The wealthy might own glazed ceramic pots, sometimes decorated with simple patterns or even family crests. The poor made do with rough earthenware, but even these humble vessels served their purpose faithfully. The chamber pot was typically kept in a wooden box or chest, both to contain odors and to provide a more comfortable seat. Wealthier households might have specially crafted wooden seats, while others simply balanced on the rim of the pot itself. Children often shared smaller pots, and families developed their own routines around emptying and cleaning these essential items. For wiping, medieval country folk made do with what nature provided in abundance: soft moss, carefully gathered from the north sides of trees where it grew thickest and most tender, was dried and stored in small baskets near the chamber pot. Twisted bundles of straw served the same purpose, with housewives teaching their daughters to select the finest, softest stalks and twist them into comfortable shapes. Scraps of worn linen, too threadbare for mending but still soft enough for personal use, were saved and stored for this purpose. The wealthy might use wool, but most rural families made do with whatever was abundant and readily available. Some families kept a supply of mullein leaves, a plant known for its velvety texture, specifically for this purpose. When nature called in the depths of night, there was often no choice but to step outside the cottage, past the kitchen garden with its rows of cabbages and onions, to what people euphemistically called the back of beyond. Imagine the quiet crunch of frost, underfoot in winter, or the soft squelch of mud in spring. Above, the vast canopy of stars spread unmarred by any artificial light, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a ghostly river. These nighttime journeys were not taken lightly. Rural families understood the dangers of venturing out alone in darkness. Wild animals, uneven ground, and the simple risk of getting lost. Many kept a chamber pot specifically for nighttime use, emptying it at first light. Others designated family members to accompany each other on these necessary expeditions. Behind the cottage, carefully planned composting pits served a dual purpose. Human waste mixed with kitchen scraps and animal manure slowly transformed into rich soil for next year's cabbages and turnips. Medieval farmers understood this cycle intimately, though they lacked our modern understanding of the bacteria and chemical processes involved. They knew that what went into the soil would return as food, and they managed this cycle with careful attention to timing and placement. Pig enclosures often sat strategically nearby, these clever animals acting as nature's recyclers. Pigs would consume food scraps and even human waste, converting it into valuable protein. This arrangement, while perhaps unsavory to modern sensibilities, represented a sophisticated understanding of resource management that many sustainable farming operations are rediscovering today. The rhythm of rural life moved with the seasons. Spring brought the annual cleaning of privies and the spreading of composted waste on fields. Summer meant more frequent maintenance as heat intensified odors. Autumn brought the harvest of gardens fertilized with the previous year's waste. Winter meant battening down, keeping warm, and making do with chamber pots until spring returned. In larger villages, where dozens of families lived within calling distance of each other, individual solutions gave way to community planning. Shared trenches served multiple families, representing one of humanity's earliest experiments in public sanitation. These communal latrines were typically built at the hamlet's edge, positioned downwind when possible, and always away from wells and streams. Village councils, often consisting of the most respected farmers and craftsmen, developed sophisticated rotation schedules. Sections of the communal latrine would be used intensively for a period, then allowed to rest and regenerate. This early understanding of sustainable waste management showed that medieval people grasped concepts we sometimes think of as modern innovations. The construction of these village latrines required community cooperation. Families contributed labor, materials, and ongoing maintenance. Deep trenches were dug, often lined with stones to prevent collapse. Wooden seats, sometimes quite elaborate, were constructed by local carpenters. Some villages even built small shelters over their latrines, providing protection from rain and wind. Folk beliefs shape even these practical matters. Many villagers believed that certain moon phases influenced odors, leading to preferred times for cleaning and maintenance. The waning moon was considered ideal for waste disposal, while the waxing moon was thought to intensify unpleasant smells. Modern science might dismiss these beliefs, but they created community rhythms that ensured regular maintenance and attention to sanitation. Protective herbs hung nearby. Bundles of sage and rosemary, their fragrant oils believed to ward off disease and evil spirits. Lavender, when available, was particularly prized for its pleasant scent and supposed medicinal properties. These herb bundles were refreshed regularly, creating a cottage industry for village women who gathered and dried medicinal plants. The social aspects of communal latrines created their own etiquette. Families developed schedules to avoid conflicts, with certain times reserved for women and children, others for men. Privacy was maintained through a combination of physical barriers and social conventions. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, and it was considered the height of rudeness to interrupt someone's private time. Village records from the 14th century occasionally mention disputes over latrine maintenance. The manor rolls of Whiston in Sussex record a heated argument between two families over whose turn it was to empty the communal trench. The local reeve eventually imposed a fine of 2 pence on both parties and established a written schedule that survived in the village archives for centuries. These community solutions fostered a sense of shared responsibility that extended beyond waste management. Families who cooperated in maintaining latrines also worked together during harvest, shared tools and labor, and supported each other through difficult times. The mundane necessity of managing human waste became a foundation for broader community bonds. As we move from rural villages to the bustling towns and cities of medieval Europe, the challenges of waste management multiplied exponentially. London, Paris, and other major cities housed tens of thousands of people within their walls, creating sanitation problems that required increasingly sophisticated solutions. Medieval Paris developed what were known as rues à la goutte, streets with open gutters running down their centers. These gutters, lined with stone when the city could afford it, carried away rainwater, kitchen waste, and human refuse. The system was primitive but effective, at least when it functioned properly. During dry spells, the gutters became stagnant pools of corruption. During heavy rains, they overflowed, turning streets into sewers. The famous ordinances of 1388 London provide a fascinating glimpse into medieval urban sanitation. These laws, recorded in the city's letter books, established strict rules about waste disposal. Citizens were forbidden from dumping refuse in the streets during daylight hours, when the smell and sight would offend passers-by and potentially spread disease. However, after sunset, the rules relaxed considerably, allowing for discreet disposal under cover of darkness. The logic behind these regulations reveals medieval understanding of public health and social order. Daytime disposal was seen as antisocial and potentially dangerous, while nighttime disposal was considered a necessary evil. The city recognized that human waste had to go somewhere, but insisted it be managed in ways that preserved public decency and minimized health risks. London's system relied heavily on the rakers, men who drove horse-drawn carts through the streets before dawn, collecting the night's deposits. These municipal employees were well paid by medieval standards, reflecting both the essential nature of their work and the social stigma attached to it. They wore distinctive clothing, often including leather aprons and wide-brimmed hats, and developed their own professional culture and customs. The rakers followed carefully planned routes, timing their collection to avoid the main business hours when merchants and customers filled the streets. They knew which households produced the most waste, which areas required special attention, and how to navigate the narrow, winding streets of medieval cities with their loaded carts. Many rakers inherited their positions from fathers or uncles, creating dynasties of waste management professionals. The collected refuse was carted to designated dumping grounds outside the city walls, often in low-lying areas that could be covered with earth. Some cities sold this waste to farmers, creating an early form of resource recovery. London's rakers often supplemented their income by selling the contents of their carts to market gardeners who grew vegetables for the city's tables. Individual households within cities developed their own solutions as well. Many urban homes included small courtyards or rear gardens where families could maintain private latrines. These were typically wooden structures built over deep pits, emptied periodically by professional waste collectors. Wealthy merchants might employ servants specifically for this purpose, while poorer families often shared the responsibility among all household members. The architecture of medieval cities reflected these sanitation needs. Houses were built with rear access for waste collection, and many streets included narrow alleys specifically designed for rakers' carts. Public latrines, sometimes quite elaborate stone structures, were built at markets and near city gates where travelers and merchants could pay a small fee for access. Among the most specialized and essential workers in medieval cities were the gong farmers, professional cleaners who descended into the depths of cesspits and sewers to remove accumulated waste. The term gong derives from the Old English word gang, meaning to go, a euphemism that captured both the nature of their work and society's discomfort with discussing it directly. Gong farming was simultaneously one of the most lucrative and most socially ostracized occupations in medieval society. These men, and they were almost exclusively men, commanded high wages because few were willing to do the work. Yet they were banned from living within city walls, forced to work only at night, and required to identify themselves with special clothing and bells when they moved through the streets. The gong farmers' equipment was specialized and expensive. Leather boots, waterproofed with animal fat and reaching to the thigh, protected against the corrosive effects of human waste. Waxed canvas aprons and cloaks shed moisture and provided some protection against splashing. Many gong farmers wore cloth masks soaked in vinegar or herbs, believing these would ward off disease-carrying vapors. The work itself required considerable skill and courage. Gong farmers descended into cesspits using rope ladders, often working in spaces barely large enough for a single person. They used specialized tools, long-handled scoops, leather buckets, and wooden scrapers, to remove decades of accumulated waste. The material was loaded into barrels and hauled to the surface by teams of assistants, then carted away to farms or designated dumping grounds. The physical dangers were enormous. Cesspits could collapse without warning, trapping workers below ground. Toxic gases, particularly methane and hydrogen sulfide, could cause unconsciousness or death. Many gong farmers worked in pairs, with one remaining at the service to monitor conditions and assist in emergencies. Even so, medieval records document numerous deaths from accidents, poisoning, and suffocation. Despite these risks, successful gong farmers could accumulate considerable wealth. They charged premium prices for their services, often negotiating contracts with entire neighborhoods or wealthy households. Some invested their earnings in property or other businesses, though social prejudice often limited their opportunities. A few gong farmers became quite influential behind the scenes, using their knowledge of the city's waste systems to provide information to authorities about public health conditions. The work was strictly regulated by city authorities. Gong farmers required licenses, were subject to regular inspections, and faced severe penalties for violations. They were forbidden from working during daylight hours, when their presence would offend citizens and potentially spread disease. Most cities require them to announce their presence with bells or horns, allowing people to close windows and doors against the smell. The social isolation of gong farmers created its own subculture. They often lived in designated areas outside city walls, sometimes forming small communities with their own customs and traditions. They married within their profession, as few others would accept them as partners. Their children frequently inherited the trade, not by choice, but by lack of alternatives. Yet there was dignity in their work, a recognition that they performed an essential service that kept cities functioning. Some gong farmers took pride in their expertise, developing innovative techniques for difficult cleanings or dangerous situations. They understood the underground geography of their cities better than anyone, knowledge that proved valuable during sieges or other emergencies. The great stone castles of medieval Europe represent perhaps the most sophisticated approach to waste management in the pre-modern world. These massive fortifications, designed to house hundreds of people during extended sieges, required sanitation systems that could function reliably under extreme conditions. The solutions they developed were architectural marvels that combined engineering skill with practical necessity. The garde-robe, from the French garde-robe meaning to guard the robes, was the castle's answer to the private bathroom. These small chambers, typically built into the thickness of castle walls, featured stone seats positioned over vertical chutes that carried waste down to the castle's foundations. The name itself reveals the dual purpose of these rooms, storing clothing as well as serving as latrines. The placement of garde-robes within castle architecture was carefully planned. They were usually positioned over moats, rivers, or dedicated waste pits, ensuring that refuse would be carried away from the living areas. The chutes were designed with slight angles and rough surfaces to prevent waste from sticking to the walls, while preventing dangerous gases from rising back into the living spaces above. Ventilation was crucial to the garde-robe's function. Small windows, often disguised as arrow slits, provided fresh air circulation while maintaining the castle's defensive integrity. These openings were carefully positioned to take advantage of prevailing winds, creating natural airflow that helped control odors. Some garde-robes included sophisticated ventilation systems with multiple air shafts and carefully designed wind catchers. The seats themselves were often quite comfortable, carved from stone, and sometimes fitted with wooden tops for warmth. Wealthy castle owners might have cushioned seats, while others made do with simple stone benches. The size and positioning of these seats varied considerably, with some designed for adults and others scaled for children. Privacy was maintained through heavy wooden doors, often with elaborate iron hardware. Garde-robes served multiple functions within castle life. Beyond their obvious purpose, they provided secure storage for valuable clothing and textiles. Medieval people believed that the ammonia from human waste would deter moths and other insects that might damage expensive fabrics. This belief led to the practice of hanging valuable robes and tapestries in garde-robe chambers, protecting them from pest damage. The architectural challenge of building garde-robes required considerable skill. The chutes had to be engineered to carry waste efficiently while maintaining structural integrity. Stonemasons developed specialized techniques for lining these passages with smooth, impermeable materials that would resist corrosion and prevent seepage into the surrounding walls. Some castles featured elaborate waste management systems with multiple chutes, settling chambers, and even primitive filtration systems. Maintenance of castle garde-robes was a constant concern. Servants, often called gong farmers in castle contexts as well, were responsible for cleaning the chutes and removing accumulated waste from the collection points below. This work was dangerous and unpleasant, but essential for maintaining the health and comfort of the castle's inhabitants. Many castles employed specialized cleaning crews who worked during the night hours when their activities would be less disruptive. The social hierarchy of castle life extended even to garde-robe use. The lord and lady of the castle typically enjoyed private garde-robes connected to their personal chambers, while lesser nobles might share facilities with other family members. Servants and soldiers often used communal latrines, though these were usually built to the same high standards as the private facilities. Some of the most elaborate garde-robes were found in royal palaces and major noble residences. The Tower of London's garde-robes, for example, were engineering marvels that served the fortress for centuries. These facilities included heated seats, elaborate ventilation systems, and even primitive flush mechanisms that used rainwater collected in castle cisterns. The royal court represented the pinnacle of medieval hygiene and privacy, where personal waste management became an elaborate ritual involving dozens of servants and complex protocols. The position of groom of the stool in Tudor England, for instance, was one of the most coveted and influential roles in the royal household, demonstrating how even the most basic human needs could be transformed into elaborate court ceremony. The groom of the stool was responsible for the monarch's personal hygiene and waste management, but the position carried far more significance than its humble name might suggest. This trusted servant had unprecedented access to the king during his most private moments, making him an invaluable confidant and advisor. Many important political decisions were made during these intimate conversations, and the groom of the stool often wielded considerable influence over royal policy. The royal garderobe was a far cry from the simple stone chambers found in lesser castles. These rooms were elaborately decorated with tapestries, equipped with cushioned seats, and supplied with an array of luxury items. Perfume pomanders hung from the walls, filling the air with the scent of exotic spices and herbs. Rosewater basins allowed for careful hand washing, while soft linen towels provided comfort unknown to common people. The ritual of royal waste management involved multiple servants, each with specific responsibilities. Pages prepared the garderobe, ensuring that all necessary supplies were available and that the room was properly heated. Grooms assisted with clothing and personal hygiene, while yeomen handled the removal and disposal of waste. This elaborate system ensured that the monarch never had to handle any aspect of waste management personally. Privacy was the ultimate luxury in medieval courts, and royal garderobes were designed to provide complete seclusion. These chambers were often soundproofed with thick tapestries and positioned far from the main living areas. Guards were posted to ensure that no one could interrupt the monarch's private time, and elaborate protocols governed who could approach the royal presence during these moments. The materials used in royal hygiene were of the finest quality available. Soft lamb's wool, imported silks, and specially prepared linen provided comfort far beyond what even wealthy merchants could afford. Royal servants were trained in the preparation of these materials, often involving elaborate washing and scenting rituals that transformed simple hygiene into luxury experience. Courtly etiquette extended to every aspect of waste management. Servants were trained to handle their duties with dignity and discretion, never showing any sign of distaste or discomfort. The language used around these functions was carefully regulated, with elaborate euphemisms and formal phrases that maintained the dignity of the royal person while acknowledging the reality of human needs. The contrast between royal and common waste management could not have been more stark. While peasants made do with chamber pots and outdoor privies, royalty enjoyed heated rooms, perfumed air, and the services of multiple trained attendants. This difference reinforced the social hierarchy and demonstrated the power and wealth of the monarchy in the most intimate way possible. Medical care was also integrated into royal waste management. Court physicians regularly examined the monarch's waste for signs of illness or imbalance, following the medieval theory of humors that connected bodily functions to overall health. These examinations could influence royal treatment, diet, and even political decisions if the physician determined that the monarch's health was compromised. The influence of royal waste management customs extended throughout the nobility and eventually to wealthy merchants who could afford to imitate court practices. This trickle-down effect helped establish many of the hygiene practices that would eventually become standard among the upper classes throughout Europe. Medieval medicine's approach to waste management was deeply rooted in the theory of humors, a medical system inherited from ancient Greek and Roman physicians. According to this theory, the human body contained 4 essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and maintaining the proper balance of these humors was crucial for health. Waste elimination was seen as one of the body's primary methods for maintaining this balance. Physicians of the medieval period paid careful attention to their patients' waste, examining color, consistency, odor, and frequency as indicators of overall health. A learned doctor could allegedly diagnose numerous conditions simply by observing a patient's excrement. Dark, foul-smelling waste was often attributed to an excess of black bile, while loose, frequent bowel movements might indicate an imbalance of yellow bile or phlegm. The connection between waste and disease was understood, though not in the modern sense of bacterial infection. Medieval doctors believed that bad air, or miasma, arising from waste could cause illness. This belief, while scientifically incorrect, led to practical measures that often improved public health. Cities were encouraged to remove waste promptly, privies were built away from living areas, and people were advised to avoid lingering near waste disposal sites. Common remedies for waste-related health problems included the burning of juniper branches, believed to purify the air and ward off disease. Sage, rosemary, and other aromatic herbs were burned in homes and carried in small pouches as protection against harmful vapors. These practices, while based on incorrect theories, likely provided some benefit by masking odors and creating more pleasant living environments. Medieval physicians prescribed specific diets and behaviors to promote healthy waste elimination. Foods were classified as hot or cold, wet or dry, and physicians would recommend combinations designed to balance the humors. Constipation was treated with hot and wet foods, while diarrhea called for cold and dry remedies. Regular elimination was considered essential for health, and physicians often prescribed enemas or purgatives to maintain proper function. The role of astrology in medieval medicine extended to waste management as well. Physicians consulted astrological charts to determine the best times for purging or other treatments related to elimination. The phase of the moon, the position of planets, and the patient's birth sign all influenced medical recommendations. While these practices seem superstitious today, they provided a systematic approach to health care that gave both doctors and patients confidence in their treatments. Monasteries and convents, with their emphasis on learning and health care, developed some of the most advanced understanding of waste-related health issues. Monastic infirmaries often included sophisticated waste management systems, and monk physicians wrote extensively about the connection between cleanliness and health. The famous medical school at Salerno produced numerous treatises on hygiene and waste management that influenced medical practice throughout Europe. The connection between waste and the spread of disease became more apparent during major plague outbreaks. While medieval people didn't understand the role of bacteria or vectors like fleas, they observed that areas with poor sanitation often suffered more severely during epidemics. This led to increased emphasis on waste removal and cleanliness as preventive measures against disease. Women's health received special attention in medieval medical texts, with specific recommendations for waste management during menstruation and childbirth. These texts, often written by male physicians but influenced by female healers and midwives, provided practical advice that was remarkably advanced for its time. The understanding that cleanliness was especially important during vulnerable periods showed sophisticated thinking about health and hygiene. The medieval understanding of mental health also connected to waste management. Physicians believed that retained waste could cause melancholy, anger, and other mental disturbances. This belief led to treatments that emphasized regular elimination as a cure for various psychological ailments. While the underlying theory was incorrect, the emphasis on physical health as a foundation for mental well-being contained elements of truth that modern medicine has rediscovered. Medieval society's approach to waste management was fundamentally different from our modern disposal-oriented thinking. Rather than viewing waste as something to be eliminated, medieval people saw it as a valuable resource that could be transformed into useful products. This perspective led to sophisticated recycling systems that supported both agriculture and industry throughout Europe. The sale of night soil to farmers represented one of the most important recycling operations in medieval cities. Urban waste collectors, after gathering their nightly harvests, would transport the material to farms surrounding the cities. This night soil was particularly valued because it was rich in nitrogen and other nutrients essential for plant growth. Farmers around major cities like Nuremberg, London, and Paris developed specialized techniques for composting and applying this urban waste to their fields. The economic value of night soil created entire industries around its collection, processing, and distribution. Specialized merchants known as night soil men developed relationships with both urban collectors and rural farmers. They often owned fleets of carts and employed dozens of workers to manage the transportation and processing of waste. Some of these entrepreneurs became quite wealthy, despite the social stigma attached to their profession. Farmers who used night soil had to develop sophisticated timing and application techniques. Fresh human waste, applied directly to fields, could burn crops or introduce diseases. Experienced farmers knew to compost the waste for several months, mixing it with straw, leaves, and animal manure to create a balanced fertilizer. The composting process not only reduced odors, but also killed harmful organisms, making the fertilizer safer for agricultural use. The tanning industry's use of urine represents another sophisticated recycling system. Tanners collected urine from households and public latrines, using it in the complex process of converting animal hides into leather. The ammonia in aged urine helped remove hair and flesh from hides, while also serving as a mordant in the dyeing process. This liquid was so valuable that it was sometimes called lant and traded as a commodity. Fullers, who processed woolen cloth, also relied heavily on urine in their work. The ammonia helped remove natural oils and dirt from wool fibers, while also serving as a cleaning agent for finished textiles. Fuller's earth, a type of clay used in cloth processing, was often mixed with aged urine to create a paste that could clean and whiten woolen goods. This process was so important that many cities regulated the collection and sale of urine to ensure adequate supplies for their textile industries. The rise of early environmental regulations demonstrates medieval awareness of the need to balance waste recycling with public health. The 1485 Cologne Edict on river dumping, for example, established specific areas where waste could be disposed of and prohibited dumping in areas used for drinking water or fishing. These regulations recognized that while waste recycling was economically important, it had to be managed carefully to prevent environmental damage. Papermaking, which began to develop in Europe during the later medieval period, relied heavily on recycled materials. Rags, old clothing, and even some organic waste were processed into pulp for paper production. This early recycling industry created demand for materials that might otherwise have been discarded, while also providing an alternative to the expensive parchment made from animal skins. Some medieval industries developed closed-loop systems that would impress modern environmental engineers. Breweries, for example, used their spent grain to feed pigs, whose waste was then used to fertilize barley fields. The barley was harvested and malted for brewing, completing a cycle that maximized the use of all materials. Similar systems developed around mills, bakeries, and other food processing operations. The recycling of waste materials also supported numerous small-scale industries and crafts. Bone collectors gathered animal bones from butcher shops and households, processing them into buttons, combs, and other useful items. Ash from fires was collected and used in soap making, while food scraps were converted into animal feed. These small-scale recycling operations provided employment for many people while reducing the overall waste stream. Medieval cities often competed to develop the most efficient waste recycling systems, recognizing that effective waste management was essential for urban growth and prosperity. Cities with superior waste management could support larger populations, attract more trade, and maintain better public health. This competition drove innovation and improvement in waste management techniques throughout the medieval period. Medieval attitudes toward cleanliness were complex and often contradictory, reflecting tensions between practical necessity, social customs, and religious beliefs. The public bathhouse, or stews, represented one of the most important institutions for maintaining hygiene in medieval towns and cities. These establishments served multiple purposes, providing not only facilities for bathing and waste management, but also social centers where people could gather, conduct business, and enjoy entertainment. The typical medieval bathhouse was a substantial building with multiple rooms and facilities. Large wooden tubs, often carved from single pieces of oak, were filled with heated water and used by multiple customers throughout the day. Smaller private chambers were available for wealthy clients who could afford individual service. Attendants helped customers with washing, provided clean linens, and maintained the fires that heated the water. Waste management in bathhouses required careful planning and regular maintenance. Special drainage systems carried away used water, while private latrines were provided for customers' convenience. The combination of warm, moist air and human waste created perfect conditions for disease transmission, so successful bathhouse operators developed sophisticated cleaning and ventilation systems to maintain acceptable sanitary conditions. The social aspects of bathhouse culture were as important as the hygienic functions. Men and women often bathed together, though some establishments provided separate facilities or designated different hours for each gender. Business deals were negotiated in the warm, relaxing atmosphere of the baths, and social hierarchies were temporarily suspended as naked bathers enjoyed the democratic pleasure of hot water and clean bodies. The decline of bathhouse culture in the 15th century resulted from several factors, including the spread of syphilis, which was incorrectly blamed on public bathing. Religious reformers also attacked bathhouses as centers of vice and immorality, pointing to the mixed-gender bathing and the prostitution that often occurred in or near these establishments. Economic factors played a role as well, as fuel costs made it increasingly expensive to maintain the large fires needed to heat bathwater. Monastic communities developed some of the most sophisticated approaches to waste management and personal hygiene in medieval Europe. Cistercian monasteries, in particular, were famous for their advanced sanitation systems. These communities built their monasteries near flowing streams, which they diverted to power mills and flush waste from elaborate latrine blocks. The rule of St. Benedict emphasized cleanliness as a spiritual duty, and many monasteries developed detailed protocols for personal hygiene and waste management. The typical Cistercian latrine block was a remarkable feat of engineering. Built over a stream or artificial water channel, these structures could accommodate dozens of monks simultaneously. Stone seats were positioned over the flowing water, which carried waste away from the living areas immediately. The buildings were often quite elaborate, with stone walls, tiled roofs, and even decorative elements that made them pleasant places to spend time. Monastic ablution rooms served multiple purposes, providing facilities for both personal hygiene and ritual washing. These rooms typically included stone basins with running water, supplied by sophisticated plumbing systems that brought fresh water from springs or diverted streams. Monks were required to wash their hands and faces regularly, and many monasteries provided additional facilities for bathing and changing clothes. The spiritual dimension of cleanliness in medieval Christianity created interesting tensions around waste management. While the body was often viewed as corrupt and sinful, there was also recognition that maintaining cleanliness was a form of respect for God's creation. This tension led to elaborate discussions among theologians about the proper role of hygiene in spiritual life, with some arguing for extreme asceticism and others supporting reasonable attention to bodily needs. Pilgrims' hostels represented another important institution in medieval waste management. These establishments, often connected to monasteries or cathedrals, provided temporary accommodation for travelers making religious journeys. The hostels typically included shared latrines, often called necessariums, which were built to accommodate large numbers of people for short periods. These facilities were usually quite basic but functional, with straw-lined seats and simple drainage systems. The management of pilgrims' hostels required careful attention to sanitation, as large numbers of travelers from different regions could easily spread disease. Many hostels developed strict protocols for cleaning and maintaining their facilities, with designated servants responsible for waste removal and general cleanliness. Some of the larger hostels employed professional cleaners who specialized in managing the unique challenges of transient populations. Rivers and streams played crucial roles in medieval waste management, serving as both water sources and waste disposal systems. Communities developed sophisticated understanding of how to use flowing water for waste management while preserving its quality for drinking and other uses. Upstream areas were typically reserved for drawing drinking water, while downstream areas were designated for waste disposal and industrial uses. The seasonal variation in water flow created particular challenges for waste management systems that relied on streams and rivers. During dry summers, waste could accumulate in slow-moving water, creating health hazards and unpleasant odors. Medieval communities developed various strategies for managing these seasonal variations, including the construction of holding ponds and the use of alternative disposal methods during low water periods. Popular misconceptions about medieval hygiene have persisted for centuries, often painting a picture of universally filthy, malodorous people who never washed and lived in squalor. These myths, while containing grains of truth about the challenges of medieval life, greatly oversimplify and often misrepresent the reality of how our ancestors managed their personal hygiene and waste disposal. The persistent myth that medieval people were constantly dirty and smelly ignores the reality of human adaptation and social expectations. People living in any environment develop tolerance for the typical odors of their surroundings, and medieval people were no exception. The constant presence of wood smoke from fires, the scents of herbs and spices,